Hi, I'm Mike, and welcome to Retro Boost. I'm very excited about today. This video was basically like 11 months in the making, but now it's finally time to declare Retro Boost 3.0. And by 3.0, I'm referring to my console setup. What a journey. When I first started this channel, it was all just kind of what it had been for years. Just my consoles on a like a hand-me-down kind of component rack for like theater devices to go onto. Pretty much everything was using composite, and I was using these passive switchers. A composite one and a different component one. Component being for the Wii, the PS2, and the Xbox, and then composite for everything else. But then as I started this channel, I discovered all kinds of really cool things, like RetroTink and Extron Matrix Switches, and then brands like HD Retrovision and Retro Gaming Cables and their parts and their pieces and their cool things. And I've spent like a year getting to know these products and gradually acquiring them until I was finally able to craft a whole new console setup that takes full advantage of all these things. And this is the third major revision. You guys have actually never even seen the first one, not really on camera. I made a video talking about it, but then I decided, you know, stuff was already changing so fast, I didn't see a point in it. You have seen the 2.0 setup, which is the first video I did about the Extron switches when I had recently acquired them and put them all together. That was the 2.0 setup. But now we're on version 3, and I'm so excited because everything is now finally done! It really was like 11 months. The biggest obstacle for a lot of this stuff was the pricing and the availability. I had to pre-order a lot of these cables and wait for literally months for them to come in. And then, gosh, but it's time! So I'm going to go over my new console setup, talk about all the parts and the pieces involved, go over Extron again for those who are wanting to learn something more about the Extron Matrix Switches. That's going to mostly be a retread of what I've already talked about in the first video, but now the console setup is a little more sophisticated, so it's going to look a little cooler, that's for sure, but I'll go over all the same information, how they operate, how to use them, how to factory reset them, etc. So if you find the video helpful or informative, please consider subscribing. It is the best way to help me grow the channel, continue doing fun stuff, and work toward Retro Boost 4.0 coming to a theater near you next July. We'll see! So, let's get started. Let's go over the 3.0 new console setup. So let's see where we've come from. Here's the 1.0 setup and all of its messy, fantastic glory. Like I said, I made a video kind of briefly talking about this, and some videos early on kind of showed bits and pieces of it, like the action replay review video actually showed a little bit of it zoomed in. But then the 2.0 setup was when I added things like RetroTink and Extron for the first time. The bulk of the consoles are still using their original factory-styled cables. At this point, I haven't done anything with brands like HD Retrovision or so on. But now, it's time for 3.0. And without any further ado, we go from setup 2.0 to all new 3.0. It's bigger, it's better, it's more spaced out, it's got room for further expansion, it's 3.0! Oh, it's so great. It's tall and great and spaced out. Consoles aren't stacked literally on top of each other anymore like they were in the past. Everything has its own spot. Even the Retron 5 has a proper spot now. It's not just mashed next to my printer. So, oh, it's great! And the beating core of it are the Extron Matrix Switches. Both of them are fully operational, ready to go, and have all the consoles hooked up. The only one that's not hooked up right now is the Dreamcast, because that's the only one that I don't have some kind of shielded cable for that I know is going to be available soon. Retro Gaming Cables has that on the horizon. That and the original Xbox. Don't have a shielded cable for the original Xbox. That'd be the only one that doesn't have some kind of improved video cable medium that's being used. For those of you who don't know, there are a number of companies out there like HD Retrovision, Retro Gaming Cables UK, Insurrection Industries, Retro Bits, all these different companies that make parts, pieces, cables, adapters, converters, etc. that are all aimed for different purposes, but the bulk of it being to improve the quality of the performance of the original hardware, the original game console's hardware performance. So to make it real simple, HD Retrovision, they make a number of shielded component cables, versions for the Super Nintendo, versions for the Sega Genesis, for the Wii, for the PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3. Same thing for Retro Gaming Cables UK. They do a ton of different cables. And these significantly can increase the quality of the video output from the original hardware. And to really put that to the test, I recently did a giant side-by-side video showing exactly that. What happens when you do composite and then those special component cables through the RetroTink devices against Virtual Console from the Wii and the Wii U. And the results were quite surprising. It was really amazing how a device like the RetroTink 5X Pro, when you give it one of those component cables, the Super Nintendo can really go punch for punch with Virtual Console from Wii or Wii U. The Wii and Wii U were still a little better, but it's kind of staggering how far the performance of the original consoles can be bolstered by products like that. So I've been spending a lot of time gradually acquiring all these consoles, or cables for the consoles. So to run this down real quick, I've managed to acquire component cables for just about every console I have. Super Nintendo, the GameCube with the newer Retrobit Prism cable, Super Nintendo's HD Retrovision, Sega Genesis with one from Retro Gaming Cables UK component cable. I got SCART cables for my PlayStation 1 and N64, and then component cables for everything else. The Wii, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3. The only one that doesn't have like an actual shielded cable all the way through is my original Xbox. So I've been gradually acquiring all these and swapping them out in the 2.0 setup until I finally got them all. And then I was like, alright, time to revise this. But everything is now spaced out. It looks really clean from the front. I'm very happy with it. I ran video and power on separate sides to avoid as much crossing as possible, but that also helps the cable management too, so I kind of know what hemisphere to go to mess with things. And of course, it wouldn't be a modern day gaming setup if we didn't have RGB lighting behind it. Whee! Glow in the dark! My main motivation for that is from a maintenance perspective, because now I can just kick on that light and go back there. No need for the headlamp like before, but it's also easier to get back there than before too. I don't have to crawl on the ground and bend over and climb behind it like the old setup. That was a nightmare. Now everything is, well, the switches at least, are eye level. I don't have to hunch over and crawl, and with the RGB lighting I can light the back of it. But then, you know, I have guests over and I want to show off how much of a psychopath I am with my setup and how fancy it is. I can kick on the lights and sync it to music. So everyone wins. So that's the basic kind of overview. All the consoles have some kind of shielded cable that's running into the Extron switches. They got the top one and the bottom one. They're kind of organized by release year, basically. I decided to go linear instead of by brand in that regard. And then the Extron switches output to my various RetroTink devices, the 5X Pro and both versions of the 2X Pro, the 2X Pro and the 2X Pro M. And they're all using component HD Retrovision male-to-male cables for the output and for the interlink between the two matrix switches. So, awesome! Let's go into what the Extron Matrix Switches provide, and I'll also retouch upon what they actually are and the parts you need to utilize them like I am. So what makes Extron so special? They're really cool, obviously. So, Extron switches are matrix switches. Matrix is an alternative word that I would say for dynamic. So, a normal switch that you find online for using for retro game consoles, there's composite ones that have 8 inputs and 1 output. There's component ones that have 3 inputs and 1 output. And there's even some alternatives online like the G-Comp that has 8 inputs and 2 outputs. And that one is a hybrid. It can take component or composite, which is pretty cool. It's just like what Extron does. Get that in a second though. So With the exception of the G-Comp, the regular switches, you have 8 or 3 things plug into it, and then one output goes to your television or whatever you're going to use, and you switch between them. They're dedicated for their particular roles, though. There's a dedicated composite one, there's a dedicated component one. The component one, in theory, could take composite signals, but not vice versa, and you're limited to 3 for the component one. Extron switches can take any analog signal kind of available to mankind right now. You could do composite, component, RGB, VGA. Pretty awesome. They can take everything at once. Doesn't matter what input it's on. It could be any of those formats. You just need to make sure that you adapt it to the ports of the back of the Extron switch, which I'll get to in a second here. But the other benefit is the dynamic part of that. They have more than one output. It's 8 in and then 4 out for these particular models. There are some alternatives online that have even more. I think the biggest I've seen is 16 by 16. 16 inputs and 16 outputs. My God, that's awesome. I would never know what to do with that. But here's what I do with mine. Having 4 outputs means I can wire up all of my RetroTink devices and one of my capture cards all at the same time. I have my 5X Pro, my 2X Pro, my 2X Pro M, and my analog StarTech capture card all directly wired up with analog cables whenever I want to, and it's ready to go. I can just switch between them, bam, bam, bam. With just a couple button presses, I'm toggling between very, very different devices seamlessly. It's awesome. If you had like multiple TVs, or you had like 2 different rooms and you're running cables between them, or like what I'm doing where I have multiple video devices like the RetroTink products and I have the separate capture card that can accept analog inputs, I can have it all wired up and ready to go now. And when I want to switch between them, I'm just pressing buttons. I'm not going back there and changing cables around. It's so awesome. So how do you use all this though? Well, there's some parts you need, because Extron switches, you don't just plug in these component or composite cables directly to the back of them. They use a thing called BNC. BNC is not too dissimilar from coaxial. It's like a single kind of needle type input. All you need to get are BNC RCA adapters, which you can find online in huge quantities. They just snap and screw on the back of the Extron switches, and then you're good to go. Now your video cables can directly input. What about the audio? Those don't look like they're using BNC. They're not. They're using a thing called Phoenix. Phoenix, up until discovering Extron switches, I'd only really seen in distributed audio systems for some higher end solutions in like nice, real big footprint homes that have multiple rooms wiring up, and they have like a multi-channel amplifier and a speaker selector, stuff like that. But Extron switches also use them. So Retro Gaming Cables UK actually makes converters for the input and the output scenario that adapt RCA to Phoenix and vice versa. So there you go. You just got to get those 2 different parts. Well, 3 technically. BNC converters, RCA to Phoenix, and Phoenix to RCA from wherever you want. Apparently you can make them by hand. I've been told that, if you have the skills, I guess. Otherwise, Retro Gaming Cables UK has got your back. You can order them through them as well. That's what I did. I did that in two different chunks, because it wasn't really cheap to do it, since it's international, to get to where I am at least. But that's part of what took this whole thing so long, was all these parts and pieces I needed. But once you get them, it's totally worth it. Because now, in my situation, I have almost 12. Is it 12? Let's count, actually. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I got 10 different things plugging into these 2 Extron switches that I can toggle between with just simple button presses. And they're all so wildly different from each other. Some are composite, some are component, some are video devices, some are game consoles. It's fantastic. One of them is the VCR player. I have that hooked up now with an HD Retrovision cable. It's sweet. It's great. The only thing I haven't been able to figure out is how to really run like an RGB cable into it. Been trying to find the right kind of adapters, but I haven't found the exact thing. So if you watching happen to have an Extron Matrix Switch and you're using RGB through it, I'd be curious to know what kind of parts you're using, because I've been doing the homework on that and it just hasn't been making a whole lot of sense to me. But for a component composite, all great, all hooked up. Switching inputs is just as easy as pressing a couple buttons. You're just choosing your input, choosing your output, hitting the enter button. That's all you have to do to basic use the system. If you find that you're having trouble with yours, you may need to factory reset it because there might have been some programming things made to it to tie some of it together that you don't know about. And resetting, it's very simple. You just hold down the two video buttons, I can't read what those words say. It's the two that light up. I'll show them on camera here. You hold these two buttons while you plug in the power cable, and then it'll reset after like 5 seconds or so. It's like 5 or 10 seconds, you're good to go. I actually had to do that for one of my two switches. I think it's because some of the inputs were programmed a certain way, or they had some audio customizations made to them that I wanted to undo. So you may need to factory reset it, but either way, you just get the parts, and for most part, you're just kind of good to plug and play. So that's kind of Extron in a nutshell. A lot of inputs, a lot of outputs, lots of flexibility. So let me go into a little more detail on how my system is kind of put together now that we know a little more about what's going on. So all of my game consoles, and my VHS player as well, are all wiring into the two Extron switches, and the endpoint to that is some kind of shielded component cable, with the exception of the NES. The Xbox is using a standard component cable, but I have that then connect to a HD Retrovision extension component cable, just because the distance it has to travel is a little bit far. It'd be kind of straining the normal cable to have it go that far, and it also allows the endpoint connection to look the same as all of the other cables that go in the back. That way it kind of has a consistent look, which I really like about having everything be like that brand or similar-ish at least. So everything except for the NES is connecting to the Extron switch with some kind of shielded connection, whether it be for performance purposes or for the Xbox aesthetic purposes, just so it looks nice. The Super Nintendo, Wii, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3 are all HD Retrovision. The GameCube is using the Retrobit Prism cable, and the Sega Genesis is using Retro Gaming Cables, a UK shielded cable. And the interlink between the 32X and the Genesis is also from Retro Gaming Cables UK. They make a shielded interlink cable too, just if you want to make sure that everything is consistent. The N64 and the PS1 are using shielded SCART cables, also provided by Retro Gaming Cables UK. Well, provided. I bought them. No one's sponsoring me. I'm telling you these names so that you know where to go and do your own research. I find that very helpful. I kind of had to find this all on my own over time. Anyone looking to do this out of the gate, I'm hoping that if I tell you all these things, I can set you up for earlier success than me. So those are all the different brands and pieces that are in use here. Then everything connects to the Extron switches. I kind of have mine organized in a funny way. I did release date, release era, really, going linear. The two Extron switches are interlinked with an HD Retrovision cable, so I select what I want between the two of them. The bottom one is the one that outputs. Right now, I have my 5X Pro and both of my 2X Pro devices, the 2X Pro, the 2X Pro M, connected all with component cables as outputs. From there, two different pathways now result. The 5X Pro goes to my internal Elgato capture card because that one can take really any resolution that I give it, which is important because some of my 5X Pro profiles use 2560 by 1440p from the 5X Pro. The N64 uses that, the PS2 uses that, and my normal pathway, my television, the other capture card, and this matrix switch I'm going to talk about in a second, cannot take that. So the 5X Pro uniquely runs to that capture card. The other stuff, the 2X Pro, the 2X Pro M, my Insurrection Industries Carby adapter for the GameCube, and the Retron 5 all run into an HDMI matrix switch that behaves just like the Extron switches do, only it's for HDMI as opposed to analog inputs. And that bad boy runs out to my StarTech USB-based capture card, which I originally purchased before I knew that RetroTink devices even existed, so I was using like original factory spec hookups to this thing, like Composite directly or Component directly. No RetroTink stuff at that time. But it also takes HDMI, so I can very conveniently use it for these other devices. The 2X Pro, the 5X Pro, the Carby, and the Retron 5 can all flexibly hook to that by just pressing a couple of buttons on this HDMI switch. So whether it be my game consoles, analog or digital, everything's running into some kind of switching solution, so that if I want to change between them all, I'm just pressing a couple buttons. I'm not going back there, I'm not changing cables like I used to have to do. When I did a lot of these early comparison videos, like the 5X Pro versus the 2X Pro versus the Carby and stuff like that, like way back, like I was having to walk around this room to unplug and replug cables for different things. Now, don't have to do that because it's all going through some kind of switching solution that's permanently hooked up. It's all done. I got nice lights behind there now, so maintenance is easy. This setup is so good. I'm very excited about it, and I have room to expand, so now I can seek out a couple of consoles that have been on my list for a long time that I haven't been able to get, mainly because there's nowhere to put them. So that's changing as well. Alright, I hope this breakdown has helped, whether it be as a source of inspiration for your own game console setup, or knowledge on the kind of cables and technologies that are out there, the Extron part of it, the parts and pieces you need, so on and so forth. I hope it's been helpful. Again, please consider subscribing. It is the best way to help me continue to grow the channel and do more awesome content. Work toward a really cool maybe 4.0 setup where everything hangs off the ceiling and I throw things at it to change buttons. Maybe like a Nerf gun or something. Who knows? But you know what? I gotta get going because now that the VCR is hooked up for the first time in a long time, permanently, using a component cable as well, I may finally be able to crack open this literally sealed copy of Pearl Harbor, directed by Michael Bay. So, I'm gonna get to this. You all have a good rest of your day.